Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Andrew Cannon, Executive Director at GRBN, and today we're going to give a webinar on what low trust in market research means for you, your data, and your company, and perhaps more importantly, what you can do about it. So with me today on the webinar, we have Lisa Cooper, Senior Vice President at RTI Research, Leigh Smith, Assistant Vice President, Digital and Innovation Research at Synchrony, and Lisa Wilding-Brown, Chief Research Officer at InnovateMR. For those of you who know the GRBN is the Global Research Business Network, and the mission of GRBN is to protect, promote, and advance the business of research across the globe through the network of regional federations and national associations. And one way we do that is through running global sector-wide initiatives to create a brighter future for the sector. And one of those initiatives we're running is called the Building Public Trust Program, which we launched 3 years ago on the back of the 2014 Trust Survey, which showed that we do have a problem with trust. We at GRBN feel strongly that we need to do something about the trust problem. I don't want to get too political on this, but we think the problem is a bit like climate change and the climate change problem the world is facing. So, there are deniers out there who say, we don't have a trust problem. But I think, it's fair to say that most of us in the industry do see the problem our industry has with trust, or at least they can see the effects of it. For example, low response rates, poor data quality issues. So, even if they can't see it in the same way, maybe climate change can't be seen by everybody, you're aware that it does exist. And I think, people struggle sometimes to see what they can do individually to improve the level of trust, much in the same way they struggle to see how they can improve the climate issue. And, that's why we as an industry body think we need an initiative such as the Building Public Trust Program to help energize and bring people together. So, when individuals take collective action, we can achieve more than they would be able to do individually. So we're going to go through the recently conducted trust survey, and I'm going to hand over to Lisa to tell you more about that.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Well, our goal for this study was really to understand consumer perception across several markets. Really, what is the level of trust extended to the research community, and how has this changed since the first time we conducted the study back in 2016? So I'll go through some high-level specs related to the project. We fielded the study across 8 different markets. The incidence rate was just close to about 100%. We fielded over 7,500 completed interviews. The survey itself was nice and short, only about 6 minutes in length, and it was mobile compatible. We made sure to balance our sample outgo across several demos, including gender, age, and region, and we fielded the study in the early part of this past summer. And we would be certainly remiss not to thank several companies who sponsored this research: Critical Mix, Brad, Disco, IBOP Connecta, Innovate, NetQuest, Norstat, Research for Good, Teg Insights, and RP Translate. So many, many thanks to those partners. Now, let's get into the main crux of this project. Our primary goal for the research was really to compare to the baseline in 2016 and understand what the drivers of trust are among consumers. Without really understanding the current state of the union, we won't be able to move forward with material and impactful changes to really improve trust and ultimately the participant experience, which is really what all this is about. So looking at the United States first, unfortunately, the results from the study, the most recent study, do not paint a pleasant picture. Only 27% of those consumers interviewed indicated that they actually trust market research companies. And we were hoping to see much better results, but unfortunately, it is a testament to the current climate that exists within our ecosystem. And, I wanted to kind of step back a minute from this troubling statistic and ask Leigh, from your perspective as an end client, what do you really think are the implications for this for this finding in your world? And certainly if there's others, in the webinar that want to comment, please feel free to do so. But I wanted to pick your brain firstly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. I have to say that I'm not really all that surprised. I will tell you that from the other research that we conduct, when it comes to the topics of trust, security, and privacy, what we're seeing here is really consistent with other things that we see across the internet and working with our own retailers and merchandisers. The general feeling from the consumer side of this equation, if you will, is that companies collect too much information, and really that consumers are more or less powerless to have any control over this. And clearly, with attitudes like this out there, it impacts us as researchers, from the completions and engagement rates and so forth, but also at a much higher level. I mean, it impacts the brand perception of the companies as well.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting, if you look at the next slide here, Leigh, this again is from the United States segment from the study, looking at market research across several different other channels or segments that consumers are interacting with. And we really wanted to take a deeper dive to understand how we're comparing against those other segments. And as you can see, we don't really boast a very high score here in comparison to these other channels, some of which are performing better than market research. One that really stood out to me was the internet search engine. So this would be like Google or Bing actually performed better than we did. We're at 27%, and those search engines are at 35% in terms of trust. And, certainly you can look at the other end of the spectrum here with social media companies coming in at 19%. And, we're really not that far off from social media. And I wonder why is it that we're being kind of bundled in with social media and some of the missteps that companies like Facebook have made in recent months with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Are we somehow falling into that realm? And is it really hard for consumers to differentiate us from some of these other segments? Any thoughts or comments there, guys?
As I said, we look at several different verticals, and obviously social media is one of them. And I am a little surprised by it, but again, a lot of it has to deal with the amount of data that we collect and the way that we position ourselves in collecting it as well. And I think that's probably why, we receive the lower scores as compared to some of these others where there's an explicit reason that they're collecting information. So for instance, even when you go to an online store, that the information that they're collecting from you is probably to mail a package to you and also to get payment for that package. So you explicitly understand why you're providing that. And I think it's once again, it's kind of back in our court as to why these scores are so low is that we may not always explain the reasoning behind why we're asking for this information and how it can help us and the consumer moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Leigh. I mean, I think overall, the privacy landscape that we all interact with as researchers as well as consumers, right? Because we wear both hats, the overall landscape is really changing. If you look at, like I mentioned earlier, Facebook, Uber, I mean, there's several multi-million, multi-billion-dollar firms and brands out there that have had some major privacy breaches and have not always been as transparent or open about how that breach affected consumers. And unfortunately, I think it's hard for those consumers out there to differentiate us from those other channels. And so it's just something to keep in mind. And as you said, being more transparent and communicating why we need that information, how that information is going to be used, stored, and ultimately deleted is really important as a go-forward strategy for us. So now we want to take a look at some of the other countries. We've really focused on the U.S. To start, but there's some interesting things here with Germany coming in much higher than the U.S. at 36%. I want to ask Andrew, why do you think Germany stands out here as a country that we all know is being pretty careful when it comes to privacy legislation, a little bit tougher in comparison to some of the other European countries? What are your thoughts on Germany's performance here in the study?
Yeah, I think, Lisa, there's a number of reasons for it, and you're right in the first one. There's very strong privacy laws in Germany, and the market research industry there has worked very hard together with the German government to ensure a position, where research is seen as an industry which protects people's data. So, that's definitely one reason behind it. I think there's also, historical, cultural reason as well, with market research really being a respected profession in Germany. It's seen as a serious profession of science, and I think that helps. But I think finally, the most important thing is that the market research industry itself has worked really hard, I think for more than 10 years now, to build a trust relationship with the general public. So they have basically every year a market research day, and the purpose of that day really is to help demonstrate the value of what market research brings to people, whether as citizens or consumers. So they run ad campaigns, and they also go out to the market squares. So I suppose in the US that's equivalent of going to the shopping malls, and they set up stands, and they give people ice cream and maybe beer, and tell them that these products are brought to you thanks to market research. And that ability to create a trust relationship where people understand the value of what participating in research means, I think gives these fruits that you can see in this chart.
Yeah, no, I think that's great commentary, Andrew. And I think that kind of points to maybe some of these other countries not doing their part, or these regions not doing their part in being transparent about why we're collecting the information that we're collecting and what we're doing to safeguard privacy. I think from my perspective, having a privacy policy up on your website is not enough nowadays. Everyone has a privacy policy. It's required. And typically those documents are 10, even 20 pages long in fine print, and it's not really very consumer friendly. And so I think that along with the overall landscape and these different privacy breaches, as well as GDPR coming out this past spring, it's sort of creating this blend of consumers being more aware of privacy breaches, being more, possessive of their information, and recognizing that they have rights as consumers, and that there's a lot of businesses and websites out there that are infringing on those rights. And so I think it kind of creates this perfect storm. And then you really get into the survey experience itself. And we have to ask ourselves, are we doing enough to create an optimal, survey experience? Are we, using very personal communication tactics? Are we letting participants know why we're collecting what we're collecting, how that information is going to be used? And you and I, Andrew, especially over the last couple of years, have had a lot of conversations and previous webinars that we've done together talking about this very one-way, very transactional relationship that as an industry we have with participants, where we're asking a lot of them and we're really not giving a whole lot back to them. And we're really not even sharing the why behind, what we're collecting. And so, I know we've been working on a lot of different initiatives around this, and I'm excited to talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. But I want to ask Lisa Cooper, what do you think are specific examples of things that we're doing that are causing trust to grow, or conversely causing trust to diminish in our industry?
Causing trust to grow is a little harder to address, but we're going to get to that a little bit later in terms of what we can do for that. In terms of causing trust to diminish, I think really a huge one, and you kind of touched on it, is this lack of differentiation with other entities that are asking consumers for their data, for their opinions, for their time. We talked about the survey experience, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But the amount of time that we ask people to put into answering our surveys is really huge. You think about people's attention spans and how much time they're willing to spend on tasks that they enjoy, right? They're on and off Facebook, they're on and off Instagram, they're getting a little hit and then they're leaving. And if we serve them up something like a 20-minute survey even, that's really not, to your point, being anything more than very transactional, one-way endeavor for them. And so, I would think that really has a huge impact on trust diminishing and someone not being willing to interact with us in the future.
Absolutely. I think there is that overall lack of transparency. You touched on surveys being far too long. I've been looking at survey inventory across, our company and our firm is a sample provider, and we, provide participants into other companies' surveys. So we don't really often have control over the design of the survey, but, we were looking at overall inventory, and we found that the average LOI was still around the 24-minute mark. And here it is in 2018. So certainly most of the industry's inventory really is not mobile optimized. It might render on a mobile device, but is it really designed with a mobile first strategy? And so things like that really do go, certainly a very long way. So I want to hand it over to you, Lisa, to talk a little bit about, personal data collection and what the results look like there.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. So we've been talking a lot about trust, or the low trust in market research, and kind of, if you lift up the hood, what you see behind that low trust is concern, right? People are concerned about what's going to happen to their personal data. Is it going to be misused? And so, as you can see here across the different countries, and even in Germany, it's a better picture in Germany, but still not really what it could be, is there's at least some concern among most people about how their PII might be misused. What do we do? What do we think causes this issue? Those are all the things that we're talking about today. But as I said, the concern about what's happening with PII, I think, is a huge player in why people may not trust. You mentioned the Cambridge Analytica earlier, Lisa. If we're linked with that can sink us through no fault of our own. Exactly.
And I think, I touched on a little bit earlier with GDPR coming about, there's just a lot more visibility to breaches of privacy. And you're seeing, agencies out of the European Union coming down hard on some of these companies. And it's still pretty early days post GDPR going live. And so I think it's making headline news, and the average consumer is much more aware of how their information is being gathered, how it's being used. And so it's creating a heightened sense of risk that is a very real concern, a very material concern that they should have. Uber is another great example. Even Google have had data breaches. And you have to think, as a consumer, if these billion-dollar brands are unable to keep my information safe and guarded and in a secure environment, how is the market research industry going to handle my information? So it creates this element of just overall fear, and it's spreading across the globe. And so as a result, I think we have to really take a much more proactive stance.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, Lisa, before we get to this next slide, and that is to link this back to the others that you're talking about, Facebook, Uber, Google. They're all giving consumers something of value, right, that consumers typically perceive as valuable. Because I find myself, every time I give my personal information for something like that, I say, do I really want to do this? And I think, well, you know what? Yeah, I want to use Uber, so I'm going to give this up. I'm giving something up. I know that I'm giving something up, but I perceive what I'm getting back as valuable. And I think that's a big part of our issue as an industry, is what we are giving back to people is not necessarily perceived as that value.
Incredible point there, Lisa. And I'll just add, I think there's a lot of things that we're doing that we can right size and fix today. But I'll let you go ahead and dive into this slide, and we can continue the dialogue from there.
Yep, I know we're going to get into that a little later, but it seems like an appropriate place to kind of tie that together. So yes, definitely we'll talk more about that. But this slide, again, from the survey, is the extent to which people feel that the current use of their personal data from market research companies is appropriate or inappropriate. And as you can see from the orange slices, more than half of people, and this is across the 8 countries, think that the market research companies' current use of their personal data is inappropriate.
From my perspective, there's things that we're doing, because of the way we conduct our research, things like asking demos, over and over again, rather than sharing those demographic variables across partnerships, right? So as a sample provider, we can share that information after the fact. You can append it, but sometimes in your survey, you actually need to use those demographics to drive the sample and ultimately direct sort of the qualification criteria. And so you're required to capture that information, or at least get it on the front end of your survey. And so that can create a really redundant experience from participants from survey to survey. And they don't understand why, and I think that's the key there is, are we doing enough to communicate to panelists, to survey participants, why we're doing what we're doing? And the other piece too, I think that goes a long way is, appropriate incentivization. Are we offering enough for the time that's required from these folks to participate in our surveys? And I think the answer right now is no. It's been an element of a lot of price compression through the years. People are trying to get more creative with their budgets, and instead of sort of figuring out other creative avenues, they're really making the participant pay the price and not rewarding them properly for their time.
So I know that we are now looking at a slide that talks about the perceived value of research. So who does this research endeavor benefit? And based on the Trust Survey in 2016, we see that people generally do not think that they themselves are benefiting, and that goes along with everything that we've said up to this point. Yourself, consumers, so we ask people about themselves, and then consumers in general, and then businesses. So you can see that huge green swath. So basically what people are saying is, yeah, I'm giving you my information, I'm giving you my opinions, I'm giving you PII, the business is benefiting, I'm not, society is not. So that really speaks to the opportunity that we have to right that wrong, to really give people the perception that, yeah, there really is value to this, to you, beyond an incentive even. We know that, we're never going to be able to incent people at a true hourly rate that they might make someplace else, but if they feel that there's some additional value, that would be compelling. I also thought it was interesting if you look in the gray, right? So clearly the people in the green are at risk. The very few people who don't think that it's benefiting them or society are at risk. But what about these people in the gray who say they just don't know? I mean, that's pretty much, if one tiny little thing goes wrong, those people can easily be swayed and say, okay, now I don't think that I'm getting any value either. So I think the combination of all of that is really compelling and speaks to why we need to make the changes that we're discussing here today. Any thoughts about how we can improve the perceived value?
There's some pretty simple things that we can do. I think, from a technology standpoint and also from a design standpoint as well. I think first and foremost, sharing back during and after surveys, people want to know, what happened to the information that I provided, that insight, what was done with it, or even in the moment. I know that in some cases being able to go in and ask someone a question, survey such as this, and then show them, well, how did my responses stack up to others? Am I in with the crowd, or is my opinions much different than what the other sees? There's a value to that, and once again increases that level of engagement. And then the other thing is, I'll kind of refer back to what was said just a minute ago, making participants feel that their time and efforts are valued, and that's both through the thank yous and introductory emails and things that we do, but also for how they're compensated as well. I mean, I think all of those are pretty easily addressable and things that we can do to enhance the survey experience. And once again, tell them in explicit terms that your feedback is valuable to us.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback, Leigh, and I think that's a great segue onto the next slide here, if you want to go ahead and take a crack at interpreting this data for us.
Absolutely. So the thing that sticks out to me from just first glance at this slide is, when you look at this, and let's consider the green to be the successful and maybe the other colors not to be as successful, is that we're only getting it right about half the time. And I think in today's world, where we have so many different methods, whether it be desktop and mobile and various technologies that support it, it needs to be better, and I know, clearly the reason that some of these scores aren't better, at least in the majority, the other, 49%, is that they're a majority or too long or almost were too long. So we've got to, we've got to look at the time that we're asking people to invest in this in a world where we know things move much more, quicker than they used to. And I know in the coming slide, I'm going to actually bring that back in house and show you the results for one of our Synchrony slides as well.
Yeah, and I think from my side, Leigh, this is Lisa, there's definitely some examples of things that we're doing that represent poor experiences. Firstly, sample routing. There's a ton of routing that goes on in the industry in an effort to really optimize conversion rate, which is another troubling metric that we all have to face day in and day out. The overall conversion rate, meaning the rate at which people qualify for the industry survey inventory, is only about 10%, and that's on a good day. So that means 90% of the time people are having a negative experience. They're not qualifying for that survey. In most cases, they're not earning any type of incentive, and they're coming back away from that experience thinking, I answered your screener questions, I gave you information, and I'm getting nothing in return. And I think those types of experiences, along with a lot of heavy grids that I'm still seeing, and again, grids are great from a computational standpoint. They make our back-end analysis very easy and clean, but from a participant experience standpoint, they're very arduous, and they don't render well on mobile devices either. So those are some of the things that we're doing today to make our lives easier, and we're really not thinking about the participant and what we can be doing to not so much think about ourselves, but think about them in an effort to really increase that universe of people who are even willing to participate.
Oh, I was just going to say, on that point and kind of turning it on its head about what we're thinking about in terms of creating a much better experience. And you've hit some of these, and some of them are kind of new, but one is mobile first. So not just mobile friendly or mobile ready, but recognizing that a large percentage of people, and particularly the much coveted younger cohort, are going to be doing this on mobile. So it really needs to be mobile first. We are trying to be much more conversational. So we kind of come from a background where we did this in the mall, and an interviewer read our words verbatim, and they were very, very long. People don't really need that anymore. They want to be engaged, and so that's what we're trying to do, making things visually pleasing, right? So simple as using kind of dots and pulls so that they pull from a rating scale instead of clicking on something. We've been using positive reinforcement throughout the survey. So saying, hey, you know what, you're halfway there, keep going. And then I'll just mention gratitude. I know we're going to get into that a little more robustly in a few minutes.
Yeah, that's great insight. I think all of those are wonderful examples, Lisa, of things that you're doing on your end that other companies can follow and really have a more positive impact on how they engage with participants. Leigh, I know you wanted to share some performance data from your side and some things that you've been doing within Synchrony to have a positive impact on the participant experience. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This slide really outlines the path that we've been on as far as enhancing and improving our own response metrics around our digital study. So let me just do just a little setup here so everyone understands, and then I'll take you through the changes that we made. So if you go to the far left for 2017, we used to do one annual digital study, and you can see for 2017 it went about 31 and a half minutes, and we had about a 39% completion rate. Now I know that sounds better than some of the figures I've heard earlier in this presentation, but still not where we wanted to have it. So for 2018, we decided to basically take that annual study and really break it down into more relevant topics for us. So in addition to increasing our response rate, it also allowed us to do a deeper dive on each of these topics for relevance. And what you can see is that when we went out and did our Q1 study, and we were able to get down to 20 minutes on average, our completion rate went up to 64%. So you're looking at roughly almost double what it was from 2017. And then when we took it up and even 5 minutes, if you will, it lowered it again down to 48%, but still better than what we saw in 2017. And then the third one was really the shortest of all and came right in line with the first one. So clearly, we were able to see that as we shortened the survey, we got a much better completion rate. And I also want to reinforce from our side as the researchers, because we did, cut these up into topics that were more relevant to us, we got much deeper insight, and I've been able to share this much more broadly within the organization as well.
It's remarkable, Leigh. It's amazing the relationship between survey length and completion rate, and you are such a glowing example of doing the right thing. It's wonderful. I want to pick Lisa's brain a little bit before we move on to the next slide. I know, Leigh, you want to cover that, but I just wanted to ask Lisa, from the agency side, what are things that you guys are doing to help improve the survey length challenge? Are there specific things that you're going to take on to reduce the length of interview?
Yeah, there are definitely some tactical, and then some broader, and obviously some that are closer in and we're able to do right away, and others we're working on over the long term. So, as I mentioned before, doing things in a much more conversational way. Respondents, people on panels in particular, do not need a 3-sentence instruction on how to do a 10-point scale or a 5-point scale. They know it. So we've cut those introductions way, way back. We, on the broader, more difficult side, is trying to work with our clients to make sure that we're sticking to the business objectives, right? That's always a challenge, is we have people, consumers, respondents, customers on the line, and we think, well, since we have them, let's ask them X, Y, and Z in addition to what the survey is really about. And of course, it makes all kinds of sense in a vacuum, but it means that we are increasing that survey length. We're getting away from the business objective. So we're trying to work with our clients and explain the reasoning behind the importance of survey length. And a slide like Leigh just shared obviously is very, very impactful. But there's just a lot of evidence to suggest that the quality of the data that we are getting suffers after a certain point in survey length. And so if we can get our clients to buy into that we're kind of trying to take on that mantle of being the people who bring them on board.
That's wonderful, Lisa. And I think it is. It's all about not only being transparent with survey participants, but being transparent with your clients and letting them know why you're recommending what you're recommending and how it really ultimately does have a very positive impact to the research that you're delivering for them. So that's wonderful to see. So talk to us, Leigh, about transparency.
Absolutely. I think this is a great slide to follow up, this conversation. When you look at this question where we're basically asking people, would it change their motivation if they were told the name of the company or brand who was sponsoring the survey? I know that obviously the largest percentage says that it sort of makes no difference, or they're not sure. And I'll tell you that probably some of those not sures really would fall into the yes category if they were told a little more about it. But what's interesting is, the next two largest slices, which are much more motivated and somewhat motivated, clearly show that there is a value to introducing, representing, presenting your brand, so forth, and letting them know what's behind it. And I'll add to this that, not only is it the transparency, but once again, you're showing the importance of the voice of the customer here, of telling you, if you tell me who you are, it's going to give a much more positive impact and outlook to me filling this out or completing this survey for it. And once again, I'll also say, when you're looking at this, follow it up with action as well. Tell them, thank them again towards the end. Tell them again what it's going to be used for. I think those are great sort of supplemental actions you take, if you will, to once again provide that support and provide that transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leigh, I have a quick question for you, and Lisa, certainly jump in. Are there any negative implications that we should consider about being too transparent about the brand or the company sponsoring in terms of biasing the research results, and are there ways to get around that?
From our side, when we are in certain cases trying to get an unbiased look at the market where we may be putting ourselves out there against our competition. In those cases, yes, you're right. It probably doesn't make as much sense to mention that we're the sponsor of it, because it would bias, it could potentially bias the results. But in general, I would say with that one exception, in the majority of cases, it really makes sense for us to self-identify.
And I'll follow up and add to that I think in that particular instance, you may be able to identify on the back end. So certainly you wouldn't want to identify on the front end that Synchrony is sponsoring this research and then ask about Synchrony and a bunch of other companies. That clearly would bias responses. But you can get all of the responses and then at the end of the survey, disclose the sponsor. Another time that it might be a issue for concern or discussion is if we're sharing, say, concepts in the research that are we don't want necessarily to be linked to a particular brand or company. We might think about whether there's a way. I don't know if obviously the most compelling thing that we can do is tell people the name of the sponsor. If we can't, for some reason, tell the name of the sponsor, is there something else that we can share that will get us part of the way there, that will, say, hey, we can't tell you exactly who we are, but here's the kinds of things that are going to be done with the answers that you've given us. So I think just sharing anything is good. Being able to share the actual sponsor name is best.
Absolutely, and that's probably a good segue, Lisa, for the next slide here. If you want to talk a little bit about what we did here and some research we ran last year and kind of the overall impact it had.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, Lisa, in the research on research, what we included were a split cell in terms of people who saw the video that you're going to see in a moment and people who did not see this video. The video was run at the end of the survey, and I'll let you play it and then we'll talk about it.
Hi, my name is Neil Marcus, Research Manager at MetLife. I want to personally thank you for completing this survey. By completing this survey, you're contributing to the development of insurance products that will be both affordable and easy to understand. As an example, similar research was conducted last year that led to the development of our new MetLife Rapid Term Life Insurance product that was released earlier this year. By providing your feedback, you are essentially becoming an extended member of the MetLife team. And for that, we want to personally thank you for your time and thought given to this survey.
So yes, just like in real life, gratitude goes a very, very, very long way. So that was really nicely done by Neil in terms of giving information, naming the sponsor, and then giving a robust thank you. So in terms of the impact of this on our research on research, I think it's pretty clear to see here that at the end, when we asked people how did their experience taking the survey make them feel about the brand or company that the survey was about, people who saw the thank you video, half of them said that it made them feel better. People who did not see the thank you video, only 29% of them said that it made them feel better. So clearly that is a huge impact, positive impact of sharing back with consumers. And if we do a survey, sometimes people have said, well, what if the survey isn't about a particular brand? What if it's just about a category? We've found that this also holds in terms of category. So if you can't mention a brand, it still reflects well on the category that's being spoken about. And of course, that has a positive impact on all of the brands in the category. It's important for us to consider market research as a touch point, right? I mean, marketing works really, really hard to have all of their touch points with their customers be positive. And so why would we, as market research, not think of ourselves as one of those touch points? I mean, what do you think are some of the benefits or the risks of us thinking in that regard?
Oh, sure. I think, again, this builds relationships at a time when people are really, shedding brands and in general not sharing information as much. So I think, once again, it reinforces that positive nature and makes it a positive touch point for, us as researchers, but also as the brand as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I mean, I think it's about making sure we widen our sample universe as much as possible, because really, if you don't have a representative source of sample to draw from, then everything is worthless, essentially, right? You want to have good quality data, good quality insights to deliver to your stakeholders, and so it's really, really important to make sure people are having a positive experience. So number one, they're paying attention to your survey, they're participating, they're engaged, and as important that they're coming back for future surveys, and that any kind of future interactions that they're having with your brand or with your category, if it is just a category-specific survey, oftentimes they can surmise, who the brands are potentially that could be behind that survey. So, even when it's not as direct or transparent, and it is more category specific, I think it's still really, really important to have the participant coming away and feeling really positive. And I should point out, our research was with MetLife and financial services, which, I think in comparison to other survey topics may not be as exciting to talk about life insurance, but it was really great to see when we did show that video of Neil thanking directly to the participant, and giving them some feedback on why we did the survey and what the drivers were behind it and how it could potentially impact future services and products. Overall, people had a really positive experience with the survey when they were shown that particular video. So I think it's very promising, and hopefully we'll see more of it in the future.
Yeah, so I think there's also a pressure being put upon us to do this, and in Europe, that's happening through the GDPR law that's come into force, which is really, trying to protect consumers and to think about transparency. And from their perspective, the key question, is who is the data controller in this case? Is it the data collector? Is it the research agency? Or is it indeed the end client? Now, nobody's yet sure where this is going to land, but there's a definite risk that it will land that the end client is seen very much as a data controller if personal information is going to be shared with them because of the usage, and that's going to define who the controller is, but we don't know that yet. I think what is important in the recommendation at the moment is to be as transparent as you can. So, think about all the surveys that you do and ask yourselves the question, what is the risk of being transparent about who the end client is? And is there a risk to the data if you do that beforehand? And if so, okay, do it after the survey. And again, ask yourself, is there a risk to exposing the name of the client at that stage? And I think you'll find most of the time there is no real risk attached to it, especially when you weigh that against these brand benefits that this chart shows. I think we provided you with a lot of compelling evidence today on, what the problem is, what are the opportunities that exist. And I think the GRBN is taken the point of view that we need to act. The time is now. Maybe it was yesterday, but at the latest, the time to act is now. And we've set out a roadmap with basically a three-pronged strategy to try and build trust. So number one, much like I said that they do in Germany, we need to improve the perceived value of research, what people perceive of why it's important for them to spend their time. We've talked a lot about data privacy and data security, and we definitely need to improve the perception that people can trust us with their data. And last but not least, and perhaps where we need to start, is to improve the user experience, because if we continue to give people a poor experience when they do participate, there is no way we are going to be able to build trust with these people. So the GRBN has put together a Building Public Trust Charter, which expands upon these principles. And I'm excited to say that all 4 regional federations, as well as some of the leading national associations around the globe, including Insights Association here in the US, have signed up to this charter. And really having the industry bodies backing this charter, I think, is going to be key to our success in actually achieving change over the next few years. And as I mentioned, I think where we need to start is with participant engagement, with the user experience. I mean, if you think about all your own personal relationships, you know, I don't think you trust anybody who continuously gives you a poor experience. So taking that to our business environment, we need to focus on making sure that people feel that they've had a good, if not a great, experience every time they participate. So that's why we're saying our mission, first and foremost, is now to fix the problem of the poor research participant experience. And we're doing this in a number of ways. At the end of last year, we worked with over 30 companies across the globe to create a handbook, which we called Engage, 101 tips to improve the research participant user experience. And as it says on the tin, the handbook contains 101 tips across different methodologies. So we've covered online surveys, online communities, qualitative research, and even passive data to give researchers some really practical tips from people working in this space. A tremendous amount of experts worked on this to give these practical tips on how researchers can actually improve the research experience they're giving people.
Yeah, and one thing just to kind of piggyback off of that, Andrew, you know, this has been an incredible guide for us personally here at Innovate, and I know Lisa and Leigh have said the same for their respective companies. I mean, from our side, we've really taken a lot of the tips included in the handbook and put them into place. So for example, we've added a more robust incentive system, which includes rewards for people who terminate from surveys, and that's had a really positive impact on maintaining better retention rates across our panel. Which we've also done is increase our earn velocity, so people are earning more and earning quicker over time, so they're definitely demonstrating more satisfaction. And we're measuring panel satisfaction more regularly and actually sharing that data back with our clients to give them some directional guidance on what they can do to improve the participant experience. And, you know, we've done a whole host of other things around more personal language, more transparency around privacy, and really trying to help lift conversion rates with more profiling. So the list really goes on, at least from our perspective, and I'm sure Leigh and Lisa can share from their end things they've done to implement change on their side. If they want to speak to it now, they certainly can.
Yeah, this is Lisa, and we too have taken this to heart. At RTI, we have a committee that has created a roadmap for us internally in terms of putting things, as I said earlier, there's some low-hanging fruit. There are things that we already were doing. There are things that we could start doing today, and we have started doing them. There are things that we see a little bit further out in the future, and we've decided what the steps are to get us to that point. So we're doing the showing respect and gratitude even when we're not able to have a client make a video like Neil did from MetLife that we showed. We actually have had some of our more photogenic RTIers create little thank you videos. I mean, all you need is an iPhone, and we videotape them on the phone doing that same type of thing, just saying, hey, you know what? There's a face behind this. There's somebody who's going to be hearing what you're telling us, and it's going to be valuable. So that's been really compelling for participants when we've asked about how that makes them feel about what they just did. I said earlier, participant-centric design, trying to make things visually appealing and also short and sweet. Transparency in terms of length of interview. All of those things, you know, we're working on the length of interview. I would say that is something that's a little bit further out. Most of our surveys are within reasonable length, but we are working to find ways when we're trying to find out a lot more information. Like you said, Leigh, you chunked yours into 3 specific categories. So we're working on that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is Leigh. I think our experience here has been much the same. You know, we've sat down a couple of times as a group and gone through these and basically said, okay, some of these we are doing. I mean, we do think that in the majority of cases we introduce ourselves and we do thank them for this. There are some things that we need to be more mindful of, and clearly you saw the example that I put up around our digital studies being one of them, and we're going to be employing that rigor going forward into 2019 and into the future. And then I think some of these for us, at least right now, are a little bit more aspirational. So I'll say they're on the horizon, but a good portion of what's in here, either we were already doing, or I would say were easy enough for us to implement, because we do have, a good relationship with our partners, which includes RTI, and because they've participated in the program, they understand exactly the language we're speaking and why we're making the requests that we are.
Excellent. I mean, that's great to hear that, you've all been able to make use of the handbook and also the participation in the InnovateMR coaching program, which you've all been a part of. So building on the 2017 handbook, we made the decision in 2018 to really step up our game and to launch the InnovateMR coaching program, which is aimed at, driving significant change in what we're doing, not just building awareness, but making sure that change happens on the ground. So I'm delighted to say that we've teamed up with the Insights Association here in the US to award certificates to those individuals and the companies sponsoring them who successfully participate in the program. So we think this is a really important step to recognize the companies that take part in the program. And as you can see here, here are the companies that have signed up so far to the program. And as you can see, we have on the call from InnovateMR, RTI, and Synchrony. So three of the people in the pioneer group. So it's fantastic that they've showed how passionate they are for this and to actually put in place a plan, some clear objectives to actually start driving participant engagement in their work. So many thanks to the three of you for taking part.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for your leadership. This is Lisa Cooper, and I have to say that, it's not like we haven't been having these conversations for years. We have, and we tried in our own ways to make things better. We always tried to do the best that we could, but I think being engaged with the other members of the community and, all levels of the community, the panel partners and our clients like Leigh from Synchrony being involved is really super awesome. And then with someone like the GRBN kind of taking the lead on it, I feel like it's really emboldened us.
Yeah, I mean, I think this learning from each other is really important. And I think also, having the different players involved who are working together, helps you align yourselves on an objective. So making sure that, what the client needs are still met while giving people a great experience. Because I've heard before people say, we can't do this, the client needs 45 minutes, or the client needs that. And what we're trying to prove here is that, agencies, clients, and data collectors can all work together to come up with solutions which deliver on the client's business objectives, but also deliver at the same time a great participant experience. These are not mutually exclusive activities. So at the beginning of the webinar, we showed the picture with the polluted sky. And now I think, and I hope you can see the analogy here, if we manage to implement these changes that we've talked about today, we can create a bright future for the market research sector. And I just want to sort of ask everybody on the panel again one more time, just to sort of reiterate, what for each of you are sort of the one or the two major implications to you if we do achieve this bright future.
Hi, Andrew. It's Lisa here. I mean, I think from my perspective as a panel provider and someone that's been working in the industry for over 15 years, I think if we're able to make this impact, and again, what Lisa said, in terms of all different levels, not just within our own little siloed vacuum, from our side, I think it's going to have the most impact on data quality, because you're going to have more engagement from participants. They're going to provide better insights into the surveys that you're collecting and running against the sample universe. And because people are happier and more satisfied, they're going to stay in our panels and communities for a longer period of time, which means we're going to be more feasible and be able to deliver insights in a much more quicker fashion.
Yeah, and then so the next link in the chain is what do we do? So now we have better data quality, and we have engaged respondents who trust us, and they've given us these really great answers. And what can we do with that? Well, what we can do is use those better answers and more robust feedback to build better insights for our clients and more impactful business recommendations, which is our end game.
And I think as the client in this one, really to take that increased quality of insights and turn it into actionability. I mean, that's what we're trying to do with it at the end of the day. And then also build the trust amongst the decision makers as well internally in the types of research and information and insights that we provide to them as well.
Oh, that's a great way to end it, Leigh. I think, you've hit the nail on the head there that, if we lose the trust of the decision makers who are relying on this, it's almost game over for the industry as such. And I think, making that link between building trust with the general public to how that makes quality data, better insights and more actionable insights for the decision makers is a key to success here. So I hope everybody, you've enjoyed the webinar, that you've been inspired by these, the great speakers I've had on the webinar with me today to think about how you can change your own behaviors to create better participant experiences. And, we'd love you to join the EngageMR program. So, click on the QR code here and you'll go to find out more information about the program. And hopefully some of you will be inspired to join us and help us make even better experiences for research participants next year. Thank you so much.